Okay. All right. That's better. Yeah, so as you can see from the title of this stream, I am reading a script titled, What Would a Better YouTube Look Like? I've had this script kicking around for a couple of months now, basically finished. I've sent it to a few friends who's given me some feedback on it. I felt for a while that it was basically done, but I wasn't quite sure how to go about turning it into a video. What I want to do with this stream is just read through the script as I have it and see what y'all think as we go. So the thing about this script is that it is very speculative in nature. It starts off with some commentary on the present moment, but it's mostly speculating about the title question, what would a better YouTube look like? So as a script, as a video essay, it's really hard to walk the line between like authoritative statements and things that are meant to be taken as a little bit squishy. Part of why I wanted to do this in a stream format is because I like the idea of getting feedback from chat as I go. There's also stuff in this script where I feel like I maybe disagree or have additional context about my own word choices and sentence structure, and the streaming format gives me a unique opportunity to comment on myself or clarify my points before the points have been made. So the reason I'm doing this now is that there has been a fair number of new videos just in the last few weeks of creators complaining about YouTube, basically, because YouTube has implemented these various AI moderation things. There's the age gating happening in the UK and I guess Missouri. And then there's just a long-standing issue of YouTube's copyright detection stuff and the way that their claim system works and the algorithm and how it highlights things or doesn't highlight other things, or the way that it shadow bans certain kinds of creators, who YouTube is incentivized to promote versus who they're incentivized to push into the shadows. It feels like it's a pretty hot button topic, and a lot of what we're seeing right now is basically a reaction to the status quo, where everybody is pointing out all of the issues with how things are done right now, why this sucks, why this situation is bad for all parties involved. And that's important. That's important to lay out the situation on the ground. But the thing that's been missing for me is the question of, okay, so what are we going to do about it? Or rather, what do we imagine the alternative might be? Because an alternative doesn't exist right now and isn't likely to come into existence anytime in the immediate future. To my mind, the only way to get to a point where we do arrive at an alternative is to start from the perspective of analyzing the platform as it exists and then using that analysis as a way to ask broader questions about what we want to see in the future. What purpose does this platform serve in our society? Yeah, that's sort of what the idea is here, is that I want to go beyond just pointing out what the issues are with YouTube and just setting that aside and going, what do we actually want to do here? What would a better YouTube look like? It's a pretty self-explanatory title. So I think that's enough preamble at this point. Okay. YouTube is broken. There's nuance to the hows and whys and the extent of the breakage, but unless you're at the very top of the traffic ladder, I doubt you'll find a creator who disagrees. In an echo of how Google has chosen to organize the internet at large, YouTube as a platform has utterly given in to the spirit of the grift. Shallow, low-quality content is prized, with the site itself encouraging you to use large data model tools, known colloquially as AI, to generate ideas for new videos with the presumption that you'll turn to the likes of ChatGPT or DeepSeek to do the rest. The algorithm incentivizes sensationalist reality show level content, mudslinging drama vlogs, Christo-fascist conspiracy theories, and conservative influencers shilling sawdust boner pills. Search the title of any big studio movie that's been announced but doesn't have an official trailer yet, and drown yourself in the flood of so-called concept trailers, LDM-generated slop that only exists to trick you. Plagiarism is rampant, harassment is off the charts, and among conscientious creators, there's an overwhelming sense that we've reached a dead end. I want to pause on the point of the concept trailers. I've seen so many of these goddamn things. Anytime you search for a movie, they're there. And the thing is that in the descriptions for every single one, they're like parody, parody, satire, satire. There's no parody happening. There's a great Patrick Willems video about AI where he discusses the difference between a Wes Anderson Marvel movie that was generated by AI with a video that he actually made that was like a skit that he and his friends produced that was a fake X-Men trailer directed by Wes Anderson. I think that is a great perspective on this exact situation about the concept trailers and sort of the slopification of all of this types of stuff. All right. Not so long ago, these types of antisocial malfunctions were a concern that YouTube took seriously, or seriously enough anyway, to at least look like they were taking it seriously. When a certain type of low-effort content became dominant, they would tweak the algorithm to make it more fair. When the alt-right pipeline became a subject of national attention, YouTube brought on extra moderators and made an effort to platform more center-left videos. I won't act like they did this out of civil obligation. To the extent that they took any action at all, it's only because Congress was breathing down Silicon Valley's neck with the implicit threat of impending regulation if they didn't straighten up. And of course, it does us no good to pretend that YouTube has ever been a truly responsible or well-run platform. These complaints are not new, and the geological strata of its years are a graveyard of creators whose work was made unsustainable thanks to service changes they had no say in. Pretty much since it was possible to make a living on YouTube, people have been saying that YouTube is broken. The difference now is that there's no competition, no government apparatus worried about ethics, and no incentive for any of them to do anything differently. If it feels like a dead end, that's because it is. The YouTube we see today is the YouTube that Google always wanted. One that makes them an enormous amount of money with little apparent oversight, whose users they can ignore without fear of reprisal or blowback. Despite being an essential locus for the distribution of leftist messaging, there remains zero threat of YouTubers effectively organizing against Google, even in a world where independent contractor unions weren't illegal. It is an essential service used by virtually everyone with internet access, over which they have total control, and no one with the power to do so even has regulating YouTube on their radar, let alone a detailed action plan for making it a reality. The truth is, YouTube is broken and no one is coming to fix it. While a handful of creators make bank on this corrupt ecosystem, the rest of us are treading water, hopelessly waiting for some other shoe to drop. But in the absence of hope, there is freedom. Google isn't going to make YouTube better because the only thing they think could make it better involves finding new ways to squeeze money out of you. And we aren't capable of pressuring them into making it better because it was literally designed to be insulated from those kinds of pressures. Even suggesting a mild congressional regulation on ad revenue distributions or penalizing the platforming of scam artists feels like an impossible pipe dream right now. So what the hell? Let's abandon all artifice of political feasibility and kick realism to the curb and just pretend that we live in a perfect world. In this world, what would a better YouTube look like? Now, if this were a Tantacruel video, I'd be showing you graphical illustrations of the platform I'm imagining, but that's not really me. I'm not a UI, UX gal, I'm not a software engineer, I barely even know HTML. And there's inherently going to be a squishiness to my vision because I'm talking about it primarily as a user who has a preferred set of use cases that, despite my best efforts, will end up biasing my perspective. So take this as a flexible, speculative exercise rather than a hard and fast list of concrete demands or a universal template with no deviations allowed. There you go. There's my court-mandated whinging so that nobody can get mad at me for not being 100% correct or whatever. Let's start from the micro perspective and move our way out to the macro. First, what hasn't changed? Well, it's still a free platform that anyone can upload a video to and stream video from. You still have your subscription feed as well as at least one algorithmically curated feed of content that suits your viewing habits. I know we love to hate on the algorithm here, but I'm firmly of the opinion that the problem with the algorithm as we know it is one of how it is managed rather than the fact that it exists at all. The difference is made by user customizability. The algorithm as we know it is reviled because its it's monopolistic and closed. A better version gives you the tools to directly control your experience. In the YouTube we know, watching a single random video outside your usual comfort zone can completely poison your feed with stuff you don't want to see. A better version lets you specify what you do and don't want to influence your algorithm, down to whether you're more interested in the specific subject of what you just watched, or creators who are making similar types of videos about many different subjects. Inversely, you can specify the kinds of things you absolutely don't want to see, and now even have the ability to block creators outright, a feature that is bafflingly absent from the YouTube we know today. Imagine a world in which you can tell YouTube to never show you a MrBeast video in any context. It's already sounding like a utopia, right? And I have a note from one of my partners here about the ability to block creators outright. There are like plugins and stuff that you can get that will let you do this. There's like platforms like FreeTube that let you do further customization than what YouTube.com typically allows you to do. But these things are reliant on an open API, and they can be broken with updates pretty much instantly. They're not a permanent solution, and they put the onus entirely on the user to seek out and install these alternatives, which just means in the world we live in now, where everybody uses the internet on their phones and most people don't even have a laptop, nobody's going to click through for that stuff. Nobody's going to, there's not going to be any mass adoption. It doesn't solve the problem. All right, back to it. But why stop there? One of the vanishingly few things I like about Blue Sky as a platform is its support for custom user-made algorithmic feeds. And it's a feature that I think would benefit YouTube tremendously. In the same way that Steam has curator feeds for games, why couldn't a better YouTube support feeds of, say, your favorite essayist's favorite channels? Why not a feed for just particular news channels whose stuff you want to follow, but don't need crowding out your actual subscriptions? Why not feeds based around certain ideas or keywords, or feeds spinning off from playlists as a baseline? Playlists themselves are a great feature on YouTube that nevertheless feel obscure and weirdly siloed from the rest of the experience. A better version of the platform puts feeds and playlists on about equal footing, because I believe the health of this platform isn't just about getting you to see the latest stuff that you want to see, but also directing attention towards the stuff that's already been on the platform for a long time. The current model of YouTube is incredibly wasteful, as very little content has a shelf life of more than a few weeks, with the most viral videos getting a couple of months at the outset. One of the big questions a better YouTube seeks to answer is that of rebroadcast, as in, how do you engineer the platform away from relying on the disposability of videos that can take hundreds or thousands of hours to produce? Which gets us to our first philosophical hurdle. A better YouTube isn't just the same platform we know, but with more buttons and knobs on the user side. A better YouTube is run by different people for different reasons, presumably ones that aren't exclusively defined by maximal profit generation. A better YouTube has less cheap crap vying for your attention because that type of content is actively disincentivized. That means that a better YouTube has baked into its core a moral and ethical preference away from disposability. If the platform is designed to have just as many opportunities to rebroadcast older content as it does to release new content, suddenly the pressure on creators to publish or perish, as it were, is diminished because the potential for views-based revenue on any given video has gone way up. Now, there's an incentive to make videos that stand the test of time and reward multiple viewings, because the platform isn't existentially opposed to those outcomes as valid use cases. But with a greater emphasis on each video's longevity comes the need for more robust creator tools in modifying the work in question. The way YouTube works now, if you release a video with a mistake, there's basically no way to correct it without starting from scratch. In my 2024 video about Doctor Who's second revival, I very blithely referred to the character of Shirley Bingham as wheelchair-bound when the correct terminology is wheelchair user. As it stands, there's no way for me to fix that mistake. An older version of YouTube would have at least let me add an annotation. But since that feature was depreciated, the best I can do is pin a comment below the video and hope that people scroll down enough to see it. If I wanted to re-upload the video with the relevant term changed, the platform would treat it as no different than uploading an entirely new video, which is undesirable on a multitude of levels. A better YouTube supports versioning, so you can patch the original video listing with re-edited versions. This is one of those essential features that only the geniuses in Silicon Valley could fail to invent, because it would imply even the faintest care for the actual quality of the material they distribute. A better YouTube would let you fix editing mistakes, retool audio, add citations, whatever it is you might need, and the viewer could roll back to prior versions if they really wanted to. This kind of versatility and transparency just goes that much further in systematically encouraging higher quality, higher effort videos. Since I brought up annotations, let's talk about the narrowing horizons of YouTube's use cases. In the old days, annotated outlinks created a small cohort of choose-your-own-adventure style vlog shows, a feature that has long been depreciated. When a novel use case emerges, YouTube's response typically seems to be to remove it, especially if it isn't perfectly optimized for mobile. A better YouTube embraces novel use cases, because before we solidified YouTube as the platform it is today, it was a space of seemingly infinite creative potential. The concretization of YouTube is not a foregone conclusion, but rather a function of how the platform has been narrowed and refined towards monetizability. A YouTube that understands digital video as a frontier for experimentation and boundary pushing enables creators working far outside the mainstream rather than punishing them. Why don't we really swing for the fences here and suggest that a better YouTube allows creators to use custom CSS? I mean, why not? Vulpix989 says, maybe I'm just too tech illiterate and not really the intended audience, but the stuff about CSS kind of went over my head. To be fair, that's sort of a side note. That's not really a particularly well thought out argument there. That's just sort of a stab in the dark because I like CSS customization. So basically, on the old web, websites didn't just look a certain way. You coded your website to look however you wanted it to look. If you go into the Internet Archive or even on NeoCities now, you see like every website looks completely differently. There's like shared templates often, but aesthetically it's all over the place. There was a predecessor to Tumblr called Xanga that I used when I was in high school, Xanga. It operated on the same basic logic, I believe, posting in sort of a public feed and being able to reblog stuff, I think. There was a social networking aspect, but it was a blog, and kind of like how Tumblr is now, you click on somebody's blog and they have their own sort of customization, right? But that extended to the main feed. And like when you're on Tumblr now, like yes, you can customize the look of your own page, but everybody who uses Tumblr is almost certainly not going to see that because nobody clicks through to, very, very rarely do people click through to people's profiles. When it comes to YouTube and CSS, what I'm picturing here is how do you make it so that the web page can be programmatically reactive to the content of the video, if that is a thing that you want? What if the interface of YouTube changed color at dramatic moments in reflection of the video? Like say you're making a high concept video essay, you're in the dark and then the whole area is black, and then a light comes on and then the whole area around the video turns white. That's just a hypothetical. I think that would be cool if, you know, it could change shape and size. Basically, I would like it if the user's ability or the creator's ability to craft an experience for their users or for their audience extended beyond the contents of the video frame itself, so that maybe when you click on somebody's video and you watch it in a new window, it doesn't look like YouTube, it looks like something else. Maybe there's just like flowers and stuff everywhere. Maybe it's all goth skulls and wings and your channel is called XX Fallen Angel XX, you know, that sort of thing. How feasible that is, whether or not that's actually a worthwhile priority, this is the area where my own personal bugbears sort of enter into the equation, and I'm sort of pressing my thumb on the scale, acting like that's as important an issue as a lot of the rest of the stuff. But that's the kind of thing that I want to throw in to get people thinking about like novel use cases, where I think we have concretized our perspective of applications, programs, platforms, where they have to look a certain way and have to operate a certain way because everything is closed in a very particular particular way that keeps us from imagining sort of non-standard visuals, you know? I think making the internet more personal again is a big step towards fixing a lot of what is wrong right now. What practical purpose is served by the general lack of aesthetic customizability across the platform, except for brand recognition? A Better YouTube's brand is defined by the quality of the content it supports, not the bland, unified minimalism of its interface. YouTube, as we know it now, feels like a dead end because it has foreclosed on all the experimental possibilities that once made it such an exciting place for creators. A Better YouTube would be looking for those possibilities everywhere it could. But the specter of CSS does raise some legitimate concerns. As much as I miss the customizability of the old web, there's no arguing that a measure of standardization helps a lot with accessibility and legibility. As more and more forms emerge in a more creatively enabled YouTube, the question of presentation gets a bit more complicated. YouTube isn't just for video essayists and experimental filmmakers after all, it's for sports highlights, news broadcasts, town hall meetings, college lectures, and so much more. Having all of this stuff share space on the same platform already feels a bit busy, and still would even with more dynamic and customizable feeds. There's a pretty simple solution to this problem, but unfortunately it's one that requires a bit more speculative work from us than this exercise has yet demanded. So far, it's been pretty easy to just talk about the platform itself, insulated from any broader social forces. But it's time for us to cross that Rubicon. I don't think you get a better YouTube without making it open source. Now hold on to your objections and let me explain myself. I am not an open source evangelist. I think it's a good idea that has been implemented to incredibly mixed results, and that's largely because it's a collectivist philosophy whose only answer to the omnipresence of capitalist incentives is to basically pretend they don't exist. Collectivist philosophy, it's probably more of a libertarian philosophy, whatever. You get my point. I don't want to get too bogged down in that conversation, except to say that the kind of open source I'm imagining here is at least a little bit different from what open source looks like now, which is to say, a better YouTube exists in a world where YouTube as we know it has been nationalized and made a public utility right alongside the internet itself and all its essential infrastructure. Remember at the start when I said we're throwing out feasibility? This is why. Getting the current government to nationalize anything is almost impossible to imagine. But an imaginary government, well, I can imagine them doing anything. In the world of a better YouTube, Therians are a protected social class, and instead of gender markers, our IDs have species markers. Why? Because I said so. Take it up with the International Court of Humanimal Relations. Hans from Stuttgart has logged on. Take it up with the International Court of Humanimal Relations. I don't even know if that's a funny joke. It's something I wrote a few minutes ago when I was reading over this one more time. So let's say YouTube has been nationalized. We're calling it YouTube here for the sake of argument, but it would almost certainly go by a different name by this point. What we have now is a central YouTube administered by the FCC or the Department of Education that operates more or less the same as the YouTube we currently know, except that it's explicitly opposed to hate speech, scams, and deliberate misinformation, and is empowered to issue citations and fines where rules are broken. The fact that it's a federal entity raises genuine concerns about its neutrality, concerns that are, I want to be clear, exponentially more valid when levied at an unregulated, profit-motivated corporate YouTube that is unaccountable for any of its actions, but it's a concern nevertheless. This is the kind of thing that often comes up when we talk about like, oh, nationalize this, nationalize that, and people go, oh no, state censorship, whatever. And like, yeah, that's something that we would want to deal with, but like the current present tense of these like platforms and systems is so thoroughly captured by private interest that there is just nonstop corruption. It's so much worse now than it would be in a regulated area where these things are democratically controlled and we actually have the ability to influence them. Just a thought. One answer to this problem is the aforementioned open sourcing of YouTube. Maybe the central platform doesn't support custom CSS or other experimental features for entirely valid reasons, but a forked version hosted by some avant-garde artist collective does. I think here, in order to avoid completely disconnecting these services, it would be appropriate to adopt the system of federation as demonstrated by the deeply flawed, but still better than most social media software Mastodon. And indeed, a version of this already exists for YouTube. PeerTube, a federated open source streaming service that functions kind of like a torrent client where you download a video to watch it and seed it so others can do the same. As much as I want PeerTube to work, it's pretty substantially limited by the fact that video hosting is unbelievably expensive. YouTube can afford it because they operate at scale and because their parent company subsidizes it as a loss leader, and basically everything that classes as a competitor utilizes paywalls or traffic caps to extract essential revenue wherever they can. It's not realistic to ask individual users or collectives to take on those burdens given the expectation that you're paying for hosting with little hope of revenue. But when I talk about nationalizing YouTube, I also mentioned nationalizing the internet and all its essential infrastructure as well, namely cloud storage and server capacity. In the world of a better YouTube, server capacity is centrally managed and could be allocated via a grant system. If your state, county, city, school, hospital, library, or local theater wanted to set up their own YouTube instance, they could do so without having to worry about the steep expenses of the backend. In this scenario, instead of the Alphabet Corporation using its military contracts and data brokerage and rigged ad markets to subsidize a freely accessible YouTube to its own benefit, now it's the federal government using tax revenue to subsidize the same to all our benefits. It doesn't have to turn a profit because it's owned by the entity that invents all the money. And this centralization also brings with it the benefits of democracy. Data centers are an immense drain on the electrical grid and are in their current form terrible for the environment, to say nothing of how those emissions affect the often low-income POC neighborhoods they're built in. A nationalized service under a democratically accountable leadership could allocate resources towards finding minimally invasive locations for these structures, as well as researching ways to curb emissions. Not because it would be profitable for them to do so, but because it aligns with our morals and ethics. Any movement that would give rise to this scenario has at its core a belief that public equity is more valuable than and supersedes the vulgar logic of the market, which is to say, private equity. And really, it's just more efficient this way. Part of the environmental drain of these services today is owed to their lack of organization, that the market is a free-for-all that has no opinion on what should be allowed to use that capacity and only cares about making sure it always has more to sell. But you hardly need me to expand on the obvious and immediate benefits of a democratically planned economy, do you? Like, what is this, 5th grade? This is a funny little side joke. This is the kind of thing that you throw in there as a little hand grenade to piss people off who are like, a planned economy? How could you? This is terror, communist, evil shit. This is what get blah, 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 blah. Hot tip for our fellow video essayists out there. Throw in a few hand grenades in your script just to piss people off that you don't want to argue with. That way they reveal themselves to you. All right. So, okay, now your university has a YouTube for lecture materials. Your hospital has a YouTube for local health and safety notices. Your county has one that partners with local businesses. So if there are ads, and that's a big if, they're not for giant disambiguated corporations, but people who live in your community, maybe even other creators on the same platform. The next question for me is moderation. What happens when someone leaves a racist comment or uploads a hateful video? Does your principal have to go in and delete it themselves? Well, if we expand the scope of this problem to the internet at large, we realize that content moderation is as much a necessary resource as server capacity. Without mods enforcing your rules, the old bad YouTube naturally starts to re-emerge. So fuck it, why shouldn't there be a nationally subsidized Bureau of Content Moderation, which services can hook into for moderation capacity the same way they do for server capacity or water or electricity for that matter. A unionized workforce that's democratically controlled and isn't motivated by profit, which doesn't subject its laborers to abusive and traumatic materials 24/7. How exactly they do that is a huge question, as moderation at scale is basically impossible without algorithmic systems for automatic detection. Suffice it to say, such technologies would have to be themselves democratically controlled rather than licensed and deployed in a way that our imaginary Bureau of Moderation has control over. This is the concept that I think is the most squishy, because I really don't know how this would work or what it would look like. I know that moderation as an issue is way too important and way too central to the functioning of basically any social service on the internet. To leave it to like volunteer labor or leave it to algorithmic tech or AI, automations, automation tools, whatever. What I'm imagining here is there's still sort of a front wall of content ID type stuff, like the level of like analyzing media and analyzing content to see what's in it. I think that on some level still has to be necessary. But in order to make sure that the users always have the ability to appeal and can get their appeal seen by human beings is essential. And I don't see a way to do that where every single like entity has its own moderation capacity. Maybe there's a way to make that work. There's lots of concerns and issues. Actually, that's what this next paragraph is about. So I'm going to read the next paragraph. Nevertheless, there are some problems we won't know how to solve until we've tried and failed a few times. This goes for the entire thought experiment. There will never be a world in which implementing these ideas will be smooth and go perfectly for everyone first try. And there's no world in which some people aren't burned or even betrayed by these programs. But it's a mistake to let those hypothetical harms bar us from opening the door to that future when the actual real-life harms the existing versions of these systems are currently causing vastly and exponentially outstrip the hypotheticals on a daily basis. The devil you know is not better than the devil you don't when the devil you know is literally strangling you and everyone you love as we speak. The point of this exercise is to walk through these existing systems step by step and ask ourselves how one would eliminate exploitation and abuse, how to mitigate harms and build more resilient systems that function for the needs of the people rather than the needs of the corporation. When I imagine a better YouTube, I find myself incapable of getting very far without also imagining a better world to put it in. YouTube isn't bad now because it's coded wrong. It's bad because it only exists to generate profit for Google. It doesn't care about the health or sustainability of its creators. It doesn't care about the mental well-being of its users. It doesn't care that actual Nazis are using it as a recruitment tool for real-life hate campaigns, because for YouTube, a click is a click is a click. To imagine a better YouTube is to imagine a world in which YouTube does care about these things. The further I go down this rabbit hole in my own mind, the more I realize that all of these corporate platforms are already mechanisms of social engineering that teach people what to value and how to behave. But we act like they aren't because we've been taught that the free market is a real thing that exists and that any choices made about what is or isn't profitable are totally devoid of moral character, and that insisting otherwise is an act of childish ignorance. And that attitude is the dead end. It's the totalizing logic of the profit motive, reducing all aspects of human experience down to little more than statistics and commodities. As long as profit remains the primary yardstick by which we measure the things that do and don't deserve to exist, then we are never getting a better anything, let alone a better YouTube. I think it's worth closing out this essay by talking about public transit. The United States was built by rail, and it once had one of the most robust transit networks on Earth. Streetcars ran through every city and many of their nascent suburbs, and Amtrak was a massive and well-used interstate form of travel. But car companies and car dealers wanted people to buy cars, so they developed an immense marketing campaign selling car ownership as the great mark of freedom and progress. To make human-centered cities more hostile to pedestrians, car lobbies invented the idea of jaywalking and lobbied to turn it into a real crime. Before, a pedestrian had the right to walk into a street whenever, and it was the driver's responsibility to be going slow enough to stop on a dime. Making jaywalking illegal meant higher speed limits, meant more capacity for cars. Simultaneous to this, these transit networks consistently failed to turn a profit because there's only so much profit you can turn selling public transit before you're just an elaborate cabbie company that nobody can afford to use. This meant less money to do its own lobbying, and in many cases led them to being bought and dismantled by car companies. My adoptive city of Seattle, Washington is today home to one of this country's most extensive and growing public transit systems. And that system doesn't even hold a candle to the one that already existed here 100 years ago. Sound Transit has been struggling to build a light rail line down to Federal Way for a decade, when what used to be the interurban rail lines are now little more than nature trails. Sound Transit in general has faced many economic hurdles, raising its fares while also investing money into fare enforcement officers to keep people honest, instead of investing in more capacity or better conditions for overworked drivers. Two things are true. Public transit has never been profitable, and our country wouldn't exist without it. When we call for mass investment into the redevelopment of public transit, we do so not because we think it'll make us money, we do it because it's better for people, for the environment, and for society as a whole. We have to decide collectively that a public good is good even if it costs more than it makes, because profit isn't what we were put on this earth to produce. The same extends to housing, education, healthcare, entertainment, and so much more. These things are too important to be left to the whims of the market. We should be disgusted by the idea that public transit can only exist if it is profitable, and we should fight back against that idea with just as much vehemence as we do against any garden variety bigotry, because it is a fundamentally bigoted perspective. Implicitly, if not explicitly, it's a belief that those without money do not deserve anything they can't pay for. We have to decide that some things are simply tautologically good, enough so to be elevated beyond the corruptive influence of profit-seeking. So, if a better YouTube sounds unrealistic to you, consider that it's no less realistic than any of the other basic amenities our leaders today tell us are simply impossible. If you want it to exist, it will have to be made, and we can only make it together. Yeah, that's the script. That's basically it. That's the script that I wrote. As I said at the top, this is hardly a systemic, actionable list of possible changes. It's more just a scattershot thought experiment on ways that it could be better, ways that often raise further questions that complicate the possibilities there. For me, it's not just about asking what would a better YouTube look like, but it's really a backdoor way of asking what a better world would look like. I firmly believe that all of this stuff is connected. For me, it's impossible to do a speculative exercise about how you would improve any particular platform or service or whatever without eventually scaling back out to, well, society itself fundamentally needs to transform. We can only focus solely on the YouTube for so long before we lose track of our ability to actually see the world that it lives in. At a certain point, you're just attacking the superstructure when the base is here and it has a lot of issues and all of this stuff is interconnected. I focus a lot when I talk about this stuff on the basic pillars of public transit, free healthcare, affordable housing, if not free housing, education, all of the typical social democratic bugbears. And I have gotten some criticism in the past for saying oh, you call yourself a communist, but you're just espousing socialist policies or whatever. And my response to that is, I agree with you that that's step zero. And we're not there yet. We need to get to step zero. Right now, everybody's talking about YouTube as a platform and how it's failing people. So for me, that is an opportunity to talk about not just how to improve YouTube, but why YouTube is the way that it is. And that is a bigger question than just the choices that they've made in deploying the program. Alphabet is a gargantuan corporation. Everything that they do is everything else that they do. You can't separate one from the other, and you can't separate the Alphabet Corporation from the world in which all of the other corporations exist. That is the nature of the political economy. That is materialism 101. Everything is interconnected. One of the things I didn't get into in this script that I just wrote down here is international perspective. I'm obviously very focused on just the United States perspective, and right now there is a huge issue with how the American internet homogenizes the world. And my easy response to that is that every country should be able to nationalize their own version of this. The open sourceification of YouTube would not be mandated to just be within United States borders. It would be a global protocol that everybody could use freely. As far as server capacity and stuff like that, that starts to get a little bit complicated. As with all of these things, there's a lot of complications, but I am also imagining that whatever the United States YouTube is, it's probably accessible from other countries, but it is not administered to other countries in the same way that YouTube is administered to every other country, despite being an American company. That's the only way that I can imagine that these types of platforms can be held accountable to local laws. Of course, that also raises questions of what if a country goes fascist and decides to close its borders and now YouTube is censored and they can't have access to stuff from outside their borders. I don't know. A lot of places are already doing that. This is the sort of thing that will just have to be addressed in real time.
Joe Biden is a rabid dog. He should be beaten to death with a stick.
I would like to thank my $10 a month supporters on Patreon and Camaraderie. Alex, Azriel Suzy Manique, Athiet, Bingus, Bobby Jane DeForge, Cam Chacon, Dick Beninya, Emma Sylvia, Fox Quirk, Halsey, J Mac D, Jacqueline Merritt, JB Silbinary Wolf, Jordan Pye, Kageki Kokoro, Kate Shrike, Lily Jade, Now I Only Want to Triumph, Ouroborista, Patrick Feeney, Pinball Witch, Rachel Zane, Richard Dunbeck, Rubeline, Scott Olson, Sophia, Sophie Huiberts, TB Skyen, the internet's beloved Princess Grace, Vesta Beaumont, Zed Bellicose, Everley Shantz, J. Jorts, Vriska Zone. If you want to hear your name read out like this, in this voice, in the credits of one of my videos, you can have that happen by giving me $10 a month on patreon.com/LTAS or camaraderie.co/Sarah Zedek.
I did this experiment specifically with this script because I've had a hard time motivating myself to do a lot of the extraneous work of video essaying, and that seems to be the case for a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people sort of turn to this thing where they're basically making videos out of their political commentary streams. I haven't uploaded in a long time, and the way that I want to make video essays is just, it's so labor intensive. It's such a burden to have to do absolutely everything by yourself. This is something that I probably could have touched on in this script, the fact that we are expected to do absolutely everything by ourselves. One could scale that out to how do you have studio space and like assistance for production. I would want a world where you get like a robust arts grants program and stuff like that. I've tried to find a way to mitigate burnout and recover, and the recovery just hasn't quite happened the way that I wanted it to. And I can't afford to just sort of keep kicking the can down the road. I need to do some stuff. So this is me attempting to do some stuff, and hopefully in a somewhat novel way. This is probably going to be a video. I'm trying to decide if I want to upload it to the main Let's Talk About Stuff channel, or if I'm going to do what every other YouTuber is doing, be like, hey, check out my second channel where I upload everything. This is a very funny trend. Video essayists being like, well, this is my main channel where I've built up all my audience. But my standards here are too high for a lot of this other stuff. So I've got a second channel where I dump all the crap, all the garbage, and all the garbage is like the good stuff. That's where they post all of their actual stuff, and then once every 3 years they post a video on their main. I'm sort of questioning whether or not I want to just forego that silly contrivance and just post this stuff on main, or if it would be healthy to have that level of separation. I don't fucking know. I'll figure that out later. Anyway, I'll be back next Tuesday with something else. Maybe I'll play a video game. Maybe I'll talk through another script. Who knows? Thank you to everybody who came out and watched and commented. I hope you have a good week and a good life and a good everything else. Take care of yourselves. Man, Scoob, you tried that T-girl pussy. Wow!